to our annual Faith and Reason lecture. We're in a split world. Sorry, let's start again. So, good evening and welcome to our annual Faith and Reason lecture. Welcome to Carroll, and we're kind of a split group here, so everything isn't what you see, right? So there are a number of people on Zoom as well as in person. As we're making our way out of COVID, we're trying to figure out the best way to do things going forward. So be patient with us tonight. Do please be aware that it's being recorded on Zoom so that it can be used for some classes further ahead. We're going to start with a short prayer, well, a somewhat short prayer, a borrowed prayer. Being that it's almost evening, today is Earth Day. At least in some parts of the world, it's already Earth Day. So I'm going to start with a prayer from Laudato Si from Pope Francis. A prayer for our Earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect the life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one.
Great, it's your light.
O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey upon it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Pope Francis. This evening, we're very honored to have a guest with us who comes, well, where does he come from? We were talking about this earlier this afternoon. Well, where are you from, right? Well, where do you want to go, right? So he brings a very, very rich background. My background with Emmanuel Katongole was actually in a course on Kierkegaard we were talking about earlier at the university in Louvain, right? It's kind of funny that he comes back here or he comes over here where I've been for a while to speak with us today. He has a background in both philosophy and theology. I'm not sure if he couldn't decide which he wanted to do or that he couldn't decide that he had to give up one in order to do the other. In fact, his degrees are from different places, beginning in Uganda, but then going to the Urbanianum in Rome, right? And then to Louvre. Likewise, his teaching has brought him many different places, right? From presently today at the University of Notre Dame. So now he's from the Peace Center at the University of Notre Dame, right? But before that, he was at Duke University and worked for I think you said 12 years, if I remember right, at Duke University and Duke University Divinity School, right? And he also worked at Ugandan martyrs in Uganda. And he also taught as a professor, as a visiting professor at Scranton University, in addition to the National Seminary in Uganda. All along, he's also done pastoral assignments. He's an academic, and he's been a priest. And he serves in parishes. I guess the left side of his brain's attached to his right side of his brain. He's also well published. He's let's see if I can find the list here. It's a list. But among his recent publications, there's one coming out soon, Who Are My People? I'm sorry? It is out already. Okay, good. Who's it from? Notre Dame Press. Who Are My People? The Invention of Love in Sub-Saharan Africa. Earlier through Orbis, he did The Journey of Reconciliation, Groaning for New Creation in Africa. For that in Erdman's Born from Lament, on the theology and politics of hope in Africa. He's a great scholar, a great teacher, a great priest, and a great friend. Emmanuel is going to speak to us today on cultivating solidarity, lessons from the margins.
Thank you very much, John, for beautiful, warm introduction, and especially for the invitation to be here at beautiful Carroll University in Helena. My colleague, Mother Michael Driscoll, always told me, Emmanuel, you need to come to Helena and see what a beautiful town Helena is. I came this afternoon around 2:30, 3 o'clock. The little I have seen of Carroll College and the city, I totally agree with Michael. And I wish I could even stay much longer so that I can experience the beauty of this place. So, John, when we were reading from Laudato Si Pope Francis's letter about let us sow beauty, I was thinking about where you are located and what a beautiful campus, what a beautiful community this is. Great delight for me really to be here this evening to share with you some stories about my own journey that is connected with the notion, with the issue of solidarity. I'm extremely grateful for the invitation to be here today. When John contacted me about visiting Carroll University, I said, of course, I said immediately yes, because I was looking forward to reconnecting with John and Elvira after such a long time. I think the last time we were together in person was 2001. Shortly after September 11th. So that's quite a long time, too long. So what a joy to reconnect with you and to spend this time together. But what an extraordinary joy for me really to be here and to interact with you all. And as we engage this conversation about solidarity, cultivating solidarity, in this Faith and Reason lecture. A great honor indeed for me to be invited to give this lecture. What I want to do this evening is not to give the traditional lecture, if you don't mind, because I want just to kind of share my own story of the kind of work that I've been engaged in these last few years, connecting to rural communities in Uganda, and what that has taught me about solidarity. Hopefully, from that sharing, we can draw lessons that connect with the broader issue of solidarity. Is that okay if I did that instead of giving a traditional lecture with the footnotes and things like that? Okay, I thought so, especially at this time of the year, this evening. So I want to share about Bethlehem Land Institute, an organization that I co-founded with 2 other priests in Uganda that is working with the rural communities, especially young people in rural Uganda, in terms of food sustainability, ecological repair, and economic empowerment for the young people in the rural community. It has been an incredible journey for me, but also a great honor to find myself engaged in this work. To be honest, I didn't even know that I would be doing this kind of work, moving back and forth quite often between South Bend and Uganda, and getting deeper and deeper into this work, more than I had bargained for at the beginning. I thought I was just going to do a small project, help this diocese, and then kind of move on with my scholarship. That was a false hope. Now I find myself actually, I'm spending more and more time, if not physically, but mentally. It's kind of really become all consuming. And so, such an extent that my scholarship has shifted significantly, that now I describe myself more and more as a scholar practitioner. And so, anyway, this is the work of Bethlehem Institute. This is our website. If you have time, look at the website, BethlehemInstitute.org, to find out a little more about this initiative. So how does a professor at Notre Dame find themselves in a rural community, spending more time working with the young people in the rural community, spending time working with organizations, helping an organization to get off the ground, forming boards, doing fundraising, talking about policies, all that kind of mundane work of institutional building that I didn't know anything about. How does one find oneself like that? In a way, what I'm going to share about this journey somehow also reflects a lot about the journey of solidarity. You are talking about solidarity? You are interested in solidarity? Careful where this might lead you. So, yeah. 12 years, I worked at Duke Divinity School in North Carolina. And while there, I was invited to co-found and lead the Duke Center for Reconciliation, thinking about reconciliation in this broader sense from the theological Christian perspective. God reconciling all things. Everything is reconciled to God. That's what we read from scriptures. And so as part of the work of the center, we invited many leaders from around the world, in East Africa, in Southeast Asia, in the US, but also we published books as part of that work of the center, kind of help people really get into the vision of reconciliation. Small books, easily accessible books, not the kind of the typical academic books, but easily accessible books. And we have been surprised by the hunger that people have shown for such easily accessible scholarship books. So the first book, Reconciling All Things, I worked with my colleague, co-founder, co-director, Ries, kind of setting out this broad vision of reconciliation. Then we invited others to contribute to the series. And one of our colleagues, Norman Wisber, who we invited to work with Fred Bassel to write a book on what does that mean for God to be reconciled in especially connection with the land, with issues of ecology. This book drew my attention to the question of land and how God loves the soil. But even as I was doing that, I was moving back and forth between Duke and East Africa, Uganda, and on some of these journeys, these are the kind of scenes that I saw. Forests being cut down, deforested for firewood, for charcoal, a lot of, in a way, ecological devastation and land degradation. These pictures actually I took near my native home where I grew up. When I was young, when I grew up, our home was surrounded by a big forest, about 8 acres of forest, and it has been all cut down. The picture that you see to the extreme left is what is being left. That used to be actually a stream in the middle of this beautiful forest that we used to draw water from. Now it's a marsh, and the land is being excavated for sand, and you can see the effect on the crops, as you can see in the picture to the top of the slide, and how the land is all bare. When we were growing up, we used to grow food on the 3 acres of land that we had, and would even take some to our relatives in the city. Now, when you go to this village, you have to buy groceries in Kampala and take into the villages. Real problem of food insecurity in this village, but also in a number of villages. Not to say anything about the water. In the meantime, also, a number of young people have left or are leaving the villages towards the cities. The cities in Africa are growing at a terrific speed, and more young people kind of move from the rural into the city. But if the cities are growing at such a terrific speed, the slums are even growing 5 times bigger than that, so that it's projected that by the year 2030, 60% of Africa's population will be living in this kind of informal settlement called slums. You can already see the kind of the ecological challenges that are connected to the slums, the health factors, that were a number of these aspects that were revealed during this COVID outbreak. But the more and more I saw these young people who are attracted into the city for employment, but of course they don't find any employment. You can see loitering around cities. But what I see in this picture, what I see in this picture is a big question mark on their faces. Who am I? Why am I here? Does anybody care? These are spiritual questions really of identity. Am I loved? These kind of questions in a way are rising up of a sense of almost a kind of despair and a sense of feeling unwanted. More and more scholars are referring to these young people, the cities without a job. More and more scholars are referring to them as surplus humanity. They are easily, in a way, disposable, discardable. So in 2012, we're celebrating 25 years as a priest on retreat with my colleagues, priest friend. And I asked one of them, Cornelius, the guy in the black t-shirt, I said, do you know 10 acres of land that I can buy? He was surprised. I said, why do you need 10 acres of land? He said, because I need to plant a forest. He said, why do you want to plant a forest? I said, because I want to replace the forest that I knew growing up. In the meantime, because every time I would go back home to visit my mother and my relative, I would stop and start arguing with the people who are cutting down the forest and so on. And they would see my car coming and they would run when we think that I was a forester. So but every time I go back, I would see more and more trees are being cut down. And I knew that I was losing the battle, but I was getting angrier and angrier at what time. I said, well, maybe I should direct this energy into something more constructive. So Cornelius, he came back and said, yeah, actually, I do know a piece of land. But and he's an educationist. He works in education, he teaches teachers at the university. He said, the whole education system that we are living in is messed up. We train young people to expect to go to the city, to find jobs, white-collar jobs and so forth that are out there. And so they feel immediate failure because they feel they cannot go back to the rural communities because those are for failure. So they kind of float around the city. And then our other friend, Tony, rest in peace, he recently passed away. He said, well, and he was trained as a business person, he was running the Bishop's Conference trade. I said, well, whatever I want to do, you have to bring in an economic dimension. People have to live, they have to feed their family. You may plant all the trees that you want, but still people have to live. So we started talking about 3 E's. I was coming in from the environmental point of view, Cornelius was coming in from an education point of view, and Tony was talking about economics. So we said, well, why don't we join hands and then kind of do an initiative that will bring together these aspects. So we pooled resources, we bought 95 acres in a rural community. And we think that maybe we are going to do school, but I was very excited and said, already half of that we have to plant the forest. And Tony was saying that we need to do some economic empowerment. So we started dreaming about what we could do. And we visited some programs in Africa, in Benin, and I was kind of really trying to explore what it is that we might do that we bring together environment, education, and economics in a way that can help the rural communities, especially the young people. Until 2015, when I remember the first time I read Laudato Si, it was actually at Milan. I had gone for a conference, and middle of the night, I was jet lagged, I couldn't sleep, so I picked up the copy of Laudato Si, and I couldn't put it down until like around 6 o'clock in the morning. I was amazed at how the language, how simple, accessible, but also how persuasive this argument, and how urgent the call was. And I said, wow, you're making a lot of connection, Pope Francis, the connection between the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. He's talking about a spiritual and underlying spiritual crisis. He's talking about calling for an integrated approach that in a way cares for creation, protects nature, restores human dignity, fights poverty, integral ecology, and he was also calling for initiatives. Paragraph 111 says we need to do, everybody needs to do something because cry, the earth and the cry of the poor is so urgent. But paragraph 111 says it cannot be reduced to a number of ad hoc policies, adjustments, and so forth. There needs to be a distinctive way of looking at things, mindset change, a way of thinking, an education program, a lifestyle, and a spirituality. I read that and I said, this is exactly what we need to do. This is exactly what we need to be. Be that kind of education program that cultivates that mindset change, that cultivates that spirituality and lifestyle for integral ecology. So the following day, I called my friend and said, hey, you know what? We've discovered exactly what our initiative is all about. We need to be the enactment of Laudato Si. So that is how we got into Laudato Si and Pope Francis, and we try to say, okay, let's try to kind of see what would this look like? How can this work in terms of bringing together ecology, education, and economics? So we started this piece of land would be a small house that you see. We invited young people from the rural communities, especially those that had dropped out of school, that were considered failures, and started working with them on this land. With the hope that, and we are sharing with them insights from Laudato Si, with the hope that after 2 years, they could go back in their rural communities and set up similar, in a way, plots of land that kind of reflect that integral ecology, care for creation, care for one another, but also a new economic spirit. We call these young people caretakers from Genesis chapter 2, the story of creation, Genesis chapter 2. And God has created out of the soil, God forming Adam out of the soil, God planting a garden and taking human beings, Adam putting them in the garden and says, till the land and take care of it. So we use that take care of it mandate of caretaking. So we call them caretaker. And there is a lot of other reasons. It's a theological reason, but there is a lot of other reasons about caretaking, nurturing, that is connected there. We wanted to do a land institute. And we said, let's call it land, because for many rural communities, and many people in Africa, land is the place of belonging. That is also the only valuable commodity that they have. And all their livelihood, but also all their social relationships are connected with their land. So we wanted to do it as a land institute. And so by this time, we had involved an engineering group that had sketching out the land, forming for us a kind of site map of what we needed to do. But we wanted also to call it Bethany Land Institute. Why Bethany? That same year in 2012, when we started talking about Bethany Land Institute, I had a sabbatical. And during the sabbatical, I went to the Holy Land because I had been fascinated by the stories that I'm hearing from this village of Bethany. I guess many of you know some stories from Bethany. Or do you? What do you know? What stories do you hear from Bethany?
St. Martha and St. Mary and Bethany.
Martha and Mary, the sisters. I was amazed at what I discovered about. I had become interested in this, not only when we were still at Louvain, when we used to go to Martha and, was it Martha and Mary?
Yes.
Parish? Yeah. But also in my scholarship, theological scholarship, I was interested in this woman who anoints Jesus. And in John's Gospel, it is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, who does that anointing. So anyway, I went and spent 3 weeks in the Holy Land, discovering more about this village called Bethany, about the stories that we are hearing, about this woman, Martha, who had her own house, about Lazarus and about Mary. A number of things in a way stood out. And I wrote a small book of these stories from Bethany, kind of describing what I discovered. One, that this was a place for the poor and of the poor. Now, the geography of the Holy Land is very interesting. Small place, you start on Jerusalem, if you go down the Keough Valley, down the Mount of Olives, on the other side of Jerusalem is Bethany. And Isaiah now in present day. Because of the security checks and so forth, it's very difficult to get to. You have to go through the security wall, but very, very close to Jerusalem, the other side of Jerusalem. And it was where the poor, the homeless, the marginalized stayed. That's why it's called Bethany, from two Greek words, Beit and A, house of the poor, home of the poor. That's why it's not surprising that you hear a story that Jesus went to the home of Simon the leper. That only could happen at Bethany. That is where the poor stayed. And two, very surprising, that Jesus, in all his coming and going, he never stayed in Jerusalem. He always stayed, yes, you guessed right, at Bethany, with his friends, Martha, Mary, Lazarus, Simon the leper, and others. On Holy Thursday, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He is in the upper room. When you go to the Jerusalem, it's just a small. So you go to the upper room, and you can only stand outside the upper room, what is said to be the upper room. You can actually see the Keough Valley down there, and the Gethsemane, the garden, and after that, Mount of Olives. So Jesus had finished, in a way, celebrating, doing the Last Supper. He went and the Keough is in the Gethsemane. That's where he prays, and he's about to go up Mount of Olives, going to Bethany. That's where he was arrested. But that was always the case. He came in and out of Jerusalem, but never stayed in Jerusalem, but always in Bethany. Once I discovered that, then you discover that these stories are even more interesting. For example, in Luke, when he says Jesus came to a village called Bethany, and a woman named Martha welcomed him to her house. Wow, who is this woman in this poor village who had her own house that would welcome Jesus in her own house? More and more as I research into this, that is unheard of, the scholars and commentators say. Unheard of. Secondly, it's always a man who welcomes a woman in his house, not the other way around. So I was just kind of fascinated with what kind of woman was this Martha, or Mary, or Lazarus, and so on. So anyway, wrote this kind of stories from Bethany because I see a lot of dynamism that is going on, a lot of interaction, a lot of intimacy, a lot of resurrection, like the resurrection of Lazarus going on. I said, well, you know, what we need to do in this institute is to, in a way, cultivate the same ethos, the same spirituality, the same solidarity that we kind of see at Bethany. So kind of really trying to put some of these theological concepts, some of these biblical concepts to work, if you like, to try them out. And really, the whole work of Bethlehem Institute and what we are trying to do with these stories, it is really experimentation. It may work, it may not work. But we said, well, let's try. So we wanted to call it Bethlehem Institute. And so our programs, 3 programs, are named after the siblings of Bethlehem. We have Mary's Farm, the Lazarus Trees, and the Martha's Market. Mary, Jesus goes to this house of Martha. Martha welcomes him. Martha is busy serving. Mary is just sitting down. Listen, it's not surprising that Martha gets kind of frustrated and say, tell my sister to get up. And you just see that there are so many people who need to be served and so on. Leave her alone. Mary listening, sitting down. In all the other stories, actually, Mary is always on her knees at the feet of Jesus. Here, in Martha's house, chapter 10, but also when Lazarus died, when Mary went to meet Jesus, she immediately kneels down at Jesus' feet. Martha stays up standing. Martha is always standing. We talk more about Martha. At the anointing, again, Mary at the feet, anointing the feet. This is what we're trying to do is formation. Mary's Farm is the formation program. How do you help young people to get into what Pope Francis calls ecological conversion? The sense of rediscovering, first of all, ecological conversion, the sense of rediscovering in the first place one's own dignity. It's in the second place, rediscovering one's place in the cosmos, in the universe. And then rediscovering the sense of connectedness. And as Pope Francis says, every human person has 3 fundamental relationships: with God, with the community, one another, and with the land, the earth. If any of those is broken, all the rest suffer. So this is the kind of the education program, the formation program. We're helping young people to, and we use the notion of listening, to learn to listen. Listen to God, listen to oneself, listen to one another, listen to the earth, to the land. And we do it through 2 ways. One, through cultivating, regenerative agriculture, really cultivating the land, learning the skills of sustainable agriculture, but also through the formation program, the rhythm, prayer life, community engagement with one another. So our caretakers go through that. This is our caretaker, Florence with her pig. We have animals, plants. But this is not just a kind of farm school. Yes, we do regenerative agriculture, the skills, the technique of how to, but all that is in the process of formation and this process of listening. So that is Mary's Farm. Lazarus Trees, the program of Lazarus Forest. Lazarus, the brother to Mary and Martha, his son who was sick, who died, but was eventually brought back to life. The environment, sick, is dying, is going to be resurrected. So this is the whole ecological education program. And we are doing it in 2 ways. First of all, the huge, major reforestation effort at Bethlehem Institute itself, but also in the community with the goal of 1 million trees by the year 2030. So every opportunity that we use is a tree planting opportunity. This was at my 60th anniversary, but already this year, I think we planted over 23,000 trees. So every opportunity, in a way, is a tree planting. So reforestation effort. Second way that we do it is through ecological education. at Bethlehem Institute and in the community. Caretakers engage in a lot of outreach program, working with the communities to kind of really connect with the ecological education. Tomorrow is Earth Day, or almost 2 years already today in Uganda. They are hosting over 600 school children on the Bethlehem Institute to do ecological education, and they have asked everybody who's coming to collect plastic along the way and bring to the Bethlehem Institute where they probably they are in a way recycling that, and they're also using some of that to build a greenhouse, and kind of really ecological education that is underway. Recently, we connected with partnered with the diocese, and there's this natural forest, Willow, Lazarus trees, that have been so much encroached on. So the diocese has asked us to take care of that. And so we're doing a lot of deforestation there, but also we are transforming this into a park for people to come spend time, evenings, weekends, not only to enjoy the beauty and nature, but also to learn the different medicinal elements of the trees, but also to go back with the seedlings for the community. That is Lazarus Forest, Lazarus trees. Third program, Martha's Market. And this is probably one of my favorite programs because I love Martha. Martha always, in all the stories that we read about, Martha is always on her feet. She has not only her own house, she's welcoming Jesus in her house, she's serving, she's moving back and forth. She's telling Mary to get off a chair and come on. Help with the service and so on. But there is also the story of Lazarus. When Lazarus is sick, it's Martha and Mary who send the text message to Jesus. The one you love is sick. And Jesus says, okay, so he spends 4 days, and Lazarus dies. And then they hear the commotion. Martha gets up and confronts Jesus along the way. Well, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Did you get the text message? Why did you come? Why didn't you show up? You see? So you can almost feel the kind of the sense of self-assured leadership, initiative that Martha. And then she goes and calls Mary. The master is here. And when Jesus is talking to Martha, he said, Martha, I know your brother will rise and so forth. Martha says, yeah, I know she will rise again in the last day. Jesus said, no, Martha. I am the resurrection, the life. Do you believe in that? Martha says, yes, Lord, I know. I believe you are the Christ who is to come. There are two people in the whole of the New Testament who make that confession. In Matthew, it is Peter who makes that confession. You are the Christ. That's Caesarea Philippi. In John, it is Martha. What the biblical commentators tell us that actually the Marthan community was as powerful as the Petrian community. She was the leader of that community. She's the spokesperson of the community. In the same way they see Peter is a spokesperson of the community that is represented by Matthew. So Martha stands in a very huge, big light when you look at it from that point of view. As the leader of the community, the spokesperson, and some legends say that after Lazarus had been raised from the dead and died again, Martha actually went off to be a missionary. Some of these are legends. But what I want to capture about Martha is that kind of sense of having her own house, the sense of leadership. So Martha's program for us at Bethlehem is the leadership training program, is the business school, if you like, and helping young people to get a sense of that kind of innovativeness, entrepreneurship, leadership skills, saving, bookkeeping, and the kind of things that make them succeed in economics, which is household management, so that they can have and run their homes as respectable leaders. So already as part of this Martha's market, they have formed already the savings and credit union, Martha's Circle. Here you can see that some of the members, they had come for a meeting. They are the caretakers again in that meeting. It is Martha's Market that is also in charge of the marketing. Each caretaker, when they come, they're given a plot of land. As they learn, they experiment, they can grow whatever they want, and they can sell that and put the money in their account. That's the kind of money that helps them when they graduate to set up their own firms. It's Martha that also does the service industry, running a canteen. Now we are in the process of financing a guest house. So that is all Martha's market. So these are three interconnected programs that bring together the formation, the learning, the education, that bring together the environment, that also bring together the economics, keeping them integrated. And the caretakers go through all that after 2 years, and with the hope that when they graduate, go back, they can become leaders in their communities and mentor others in the similar ecological issue. 2019, or before 2019, no sooner had we purchased the land than we got into problems with that land, a lot of land conflicts. This is an ongoing issue in many places in Africa, land conflict. The same people that had sold us the land, we had the title, we still have the title, we got to contest it, and so part of it is connected with the colonial system of land tenure that we have, on top of which have been, in a way, superimposed new registers. So the Diocese of Kasarani came and said, well, this is an important project connected with Laudato Si, want to be part of Laudato Si network, Laudato Si action platform, so we'll give you new land. But with 95 acres, we're holding tightly on the 95 acres of our land and so forth. When we got into conflict, we're so miserable and so almost desperate, and that says, we'll give you land. And they gave us over 240 acres of land. And so that is where, in a way, the campus of Bethlehem Land Institute is. I mentioned that because it's one of the lessons that I wanted to speak about, the gifts, the unexpected gifts about that. So this is the Luero, the middle of the church there is the first parish in this part of the country, founded in 1890. And below that that's where Bethlehem Land Institute is located now.
Oh my God, he's still garden.
Started by the Belgian missionaries that established this parish. And there is a school there, and 2 schools actually. There's a small minor seminary and a high school, and the university is about 3 miles away from that. That is where BLI is located. All these years then, kind of working on that, doing a lot of planning, staff hiring, construction. This was last year in March, the official starting of the Land Institute. Bishop Paulson is now the Archbishop, came, and these are all the caretaker learners that started the program last year. Already this July, we're going to graduate the first cohort of BLI caretakers. This is the opening day. And the bishop said, well, this seems to be a very important initiative that I think connects us to Laudato Si, but also to care for creation. This is a pastoral priority. I would like all my seminarians actually to spend 4 months in the program. And the seminarians said, what, 4 months? We are seminarians, for God's sake, doing philosophy and theology and master's degrees and so forth. So they came screaming and kicking. After 4 months, they didn't want to go. Their hands were dirty and so forth, but they loved each and every piece. But the bishop's vision was that once they graduate, they become priests. Then they can go to the local communities, they become pastors, and in a way provide leadership for how to care for the land, but also in terms of economic enterprise. 6 o'clock in the morning, it's morning mass, 6:30, seminarians come back, remove those cassocks, put on the overalls, go to the field with the others. I just love it. I love it. So these are the seminarians, and the bishop also decided that it would be a requirement for ordination for the seminarian to go through at least 4 months of the program. This is the first program. The dormitories are for our caretakers, girls' dormitory and boys' dormitory. These are the caretakers in dorms, and this is a girls' dorm. Okay, not as good as Carroll dorms, but okay, yeah. This is the St. Francis House, which is a kind of retreat center, guest house at the edge of the forest, where we would like to invite people to connect with creation, but also to fall in love with creation, but also with the poor in a way that having discovered their own identity. So it's a kind of a retreat. We'd like people who come to stay here, take the long walks in the forest, just kind of to cover a sense of that identity. Who am I? Lessons, caretakers, lessons. So there's a theoretical part, the practical part. 70% of it is more practical and hands-on. These are the structures that the caretakers build on the land for the animals, simple structures that they can then duplicate once they graduate from the program. These are the caretakers working with the community, creation care, ecological education. These are again the caretakers working with the school, they're writing school, doing ecological education, reforestation efforts. This was with some of my students in 2019. With the students there. This was 2020, a class that I taught called Peace, Ecology, and Integral Human Development. We were actually there when the border started to close because of COVID, so we had to rush back the students. Some of the students in the Lazarus Forest. So that's kind of giving you a sense of the kind of work that I'm involved in the rural communities around this Bethlehem land history. A very exciting work, a humbling work, but with, I think, a number of lessons for the topic of solidarity that we're talking about. So for the remaining time, let me reflect briefly about 5 lessons that I see that are connected with the issue, the topic of solidarity, that I've learning really from this work. 5 quick lessons. The first lesson is the gospel, the Christian gospel. Faith is really about solidarity. Not our solidarity to begin with, but God's solidarity with God's creation. If there is something unique about Christianity, it is this: He came to dwell among us. What kind of God is this that comes to dwell among people? What an ineffective way of saving people. For God's sake, if you are God, why don't you just snap a finger and there be no poverty, and so it goes? Let there be no sickness. He is omnipresent, he's omnipotent, isn't he? He can do whatever. Wouldn't that be far more effective? Just kind of like we read in the first creation account, God said, and it was. Why don't just God remain where he is in his abode in heaven and just kind of command? No more sickness, no more death. Everybody be happy. I guess he could do it, and it would be so simple. It would not even cost him much. He's God. But that's not what he does. He does something better. He comes to dwell among us. This is the uniqueness of the Christian story. This is the uniqueness of Christian faith that shows a unique God, that he came to dwell among us, to establish his home here, to experience our own life, the ups and downs, including suffering and dying on the cross. I know these days it's difficult to be surprised because we have so many things on our fingertips, on our phones and so forth, so much. But we need now and again to stop and be surprised at a God who comes to dwell in our midst and gets slowed down by us and gets suffering, gets nailed to the cross, dies on the cross. This is solidarity par excellence. Bethany speaks to that at home. Bethany, living marginalized with the poor. And at Bethany, as you can see, Martha's house, a lot of celebration, a lot of laughter. It's not surprising that Mary doesn't want to leave Jesus' side because he's an incredibly funny man, and the couple is just friendship, intimacy, love. And of course, the sister sent the text to Jesus, "When you love is sick," and so Jesus expects Jesus to show up immediately. When he doesn't show up, when Mary comes, Mary's at the feet and says, "Oh, Master, if you have been here, Jesus says, where have you put him?" Mary says, "Come and see." Jesus wept, sharing pain. That is solidarity par excellence. Jean Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche community, those who live with, bring together the able with the disabled in community, incarnational living, once said, "What the poor require of us, what the marginalized require of us, is not so much that we do things for them, but that we sit at the same table and together experience what it means to be God's children." He's talking about the same incarnational vision. He came to dwell among us. That is what God does, to sit at the table with us, so that John can say, "We saw his glory, we ate with him, we touched him." That is solidarity. That is the gospel. That is faith. 2, solidarity is about presence for the long haul. It would be much easier if solidarity was about kind of humanitarian, quick drop of aid up there. And I guess that's too is good when there is need, to do this kind of humanitarian outreach, raise funds, we give donations, we help the poor that way, then the poor can go on with their life and we can go on with our life. But this thing called solidarity invites us always to go even deeper, a step further, and establish home among marginalized, the poor. It's always calling us to the margins. Pope Francis says the gospel is always an invitation to the margins, to cross that threshold and in a way find ourselves to these discarded places, the margin. Pope Francis likes the margin. There is something, he says, about the margins that is essential to the Christian life. And then he says, those who enjoy life the most are those who live the comfort of whether to go and never share their life. The challenge of this is a long haul, but that changes us. We cannot go on in the same way. We wish we could do a little solidarity and not really radically change, but the long haul changes us. But that changing might on the surface appear threatening, But it's actually the kind of transformation that we need in order to be saved, but also in order to establish that friendship with the poor, to learn to be at home with the poor. Jean-Luc, the brother to Paul, both brothers are from Haiti. Jean-Luc studied here in the US, married an American woman, and went back to Fond du Lac, village. And he's been there for over 25 years with his family. When he got this village, a few things have changed, but they have been involved in everything connected with the village. School boards, road building, whatever, they've just become part of the community. Paul, his brother, joined World Vision International. You all know World Vision International, the biggest Christian NGO. When the first earthquake hit Haiti, World Vision poured in millions of money. And they have been doing that. And then the second earthquake. Paul recently reflected in a piece about his work with World Vision. He said, well, you know, World Vision has spent a lot of money in Haiti. And when I think about it, this is positive, when I think about it, I wonder, in many ways, whether my brother didn't choose the better option. Long haul. We can do this humanitarian, and so, but in terms of the transformation, not only the transformation of communities, but also transformation of lives, this is what Paul is reflecting about. He said, many times I think my brother has chosen the better option. Solidarity for the long haul. The third observation I want to make is what Pope Francis talks about in Lazarus. The cry of the poor and the cry of the earth go hand in hand. How do we develop attentiveness so that we can listen to both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor? The two go hand in hand. There is no way in our time and age that we can be in solidarity with the marginalized, with the poor, if we don't attend also at the same time the cry of the earth. Their cry is also the cry of the earth. The environmental and the social go hand in hand, especially in this day and age, in our time. It has become very, very clear, very, very apparent that those two cannot be separated. A social approach is always an ecological approach, an ecological approach is always a social approach. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor go hand in hand. And in our world, see also Pope Francis says that behind these cries, there is an underlying spiritual crisis. And for him, the spiritual crisis on the Bible is that we have forgotten what it means to belong. To belong to God, to belong to one another, and to belong to the earth. That is what human life should be about, really, in a way, reconnecting us to all the three dimensions. But if we don't reconnect to the three dimensions, we not only easily forget the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, we get into what he describes as the globalization of indifference. But in the end, it is our own impoverishment that actually is at stake. For as the Kenyan Wangari Maathai, first Nobel laureate, African woman, environmentalist says, if we degrade the earth, we degrade ourselves. Any efforts to heal the earth is actually an effort to heal ourselves. The two are connected. going hand in hand. Solidarity in our time requires us to attend to both. And more importantly, to attend to that underlying spiritual crisis, disconnect. The fourth observation I want to make, one of the lessons I've learned, is the institutional dynamics, the institutional challenge. To be sure, this has been one of the most daunting, one of the most surprising aspects about my work with Bethlehem Institute. Not only finding myself registered in organizations, forming boards, doing budgets, fundraising, engaging architects, all the things that kind of policies, especially policies. I didn't know. I am a philosopher by trade, trying to do theology. So what do I know about all these policies, budgets, hiring, interviews, and things like that, and letting go of, oh my goodness, this is this kind of institutional work. And I realize more and more that is so needed, because it is institutions that carry forward the gains of today into the future. Without institutions, the wisdom of the past cannot be carried on to the next generation. It's institutions that actually, in the end, carry us forward. In one of my earlier books, I had written that the challenge of Africa is really the challenge of institutions. Either the lack of institution, the weakness of institutions, or the imagination that drives the institutions that, in a way, shape Africa's economic and political social life. That these need to be reinvented. I didn't realize that down the road, I would find myself engaged in kind of building an institution at a grassroots level in a way, then realized how daunting that is. Recently, one friend of mine, I had actually called him to wish him a happy birthday, but he has supported the work at Bethlehem Institute and said, "Oh, Father Emmanuel, how are things at BLI?" I said, "Oh, things are going well," and so forth. "So what are they working on? How is the other building and Mary's Hall? Is it finished?" I said, "Yes, it's finished." And then, what are you working on? I said, "Well, we're working on St. Francis House now." "So how much is that?" I told him it was around 150,000 USD. I said, "Hey, man, that's a lot of money. This is Africa." I said, "Well, you know, if you do that building in, let's say, Helena or whatever, it will cost you about 370 USD. So 150 is still, yeah, but still, why don't you just use that money to help the poor?" I said, "Well, we are helping the poor." We're helping the poor by building institutions. Institutions are needed because these institutions carry us to the next generations. And one of the things that I'm discovering about the institutions, in a way, they are the ones that shape individuals, not so much to kind of tell them how to give them fish, but also not only tell them how to fish, but also enable them to gain their agency so that they can, in a way, establish their own fish ponds. This is the work of institution. This is the institutional building. But this means that it is not only more costly, it is more daunting, it takes more money and more effort than the immediate usual humanitarian assistance. The challenge that I find in our day and time, that we're so much used when we talk about the poor, especially when we talk about Africa, to do humanitarian. And so if we raise $50,000, we say, "Oh boy, that's a lot of money in Africa," which is the case, it is a lot of money. But if it does not really connect also help build the institutions, then they are going to always be in need of our assistance. So the child building institution. But Francis more recently reflected on this in Fratelli Tutti and said something to the effect. I think it's paragraph 126 or 28. He said something to the effect that if you help an elderly person to cross a river, that is indeed a charitable and commendable act. But if you build a bridge, that is even far more charitable and commendable act. So how do we, transition even in our own mindset from just kind of humanitarian to helping building institution, sound, stable institution that are infused, as Pope Francis said, that are infused with caritas, with love, as the imagination that is kind of driving this institution. So anyway, the work of institutional building. And finally, the work of being concrete, real, small. Wendell Berry, the famous agrarian, environmental poet, essayist, activist, Kentucky, has a small, beautiful piece that I really recommend that you go back, which is called Think Little. Think Little. And he comes back to the same idea in another essay called Out of Your Car, Off Your Horse. Out of your car, your... What he's calling for is that global thinking can be paralyzing. If you have to solve global problems, as some economists are saying, for example, Jeffrey Sachs and others, the end of poverty. We can end poverty in the world. Well, when the Bible says, think little, but that think concrete, think very specific. And for him, think little is not just kind of my mental work of thinking. For him, think little is a form of engagement, of deep engagement in a concrete place, in a concrete activity. It is actually through engagement, that kind of concrete engagement, that you even discover what the problem is. Like, for example, we never really learn what the problem of poverty is, or what the problem of environmental decay is. We can never really understand it until we try to begin to engage it. This is what I say, think little. And for him, think little is also a question of getting, in a way, not only contextualized, but also developing and cultivating affection, what he means by affection. That the whole of one's life, emotions, is invested. It's not just a kind of one time, but it's kind of really deep investment. In the end, he makes this conclusion, and this is also my conclusion. The work of planet saving, or the work of planet saving, he says, is always going to be small, humble, and humbling. But in far as it involves love, always pleasing and rewarding. We can say that about solidarity. The work of solidarity is always going to be small, humble, and humbling. But in as far as it involves love and affection, it's always going to be pleasing and rewarding. This is one of the greatest gifts that I'm discovering as I get more and more involved in this kind of work through the Bethlehem Land Institute. And thank you very much. I think I've spoken enough. We would like to have some conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, very much for sharing your kind of journey of Laudato Si, right? It's not just a document, it's been a journey for you, and we very much appreciate you sharing that with us. As we enter into question and answer, if you're on Zoom, I would ask you to type your questions into chat, and we'll try to funnel some of those questions in. If you have a question here in the room physically, I'll go around with the mic so that everybody both here and online can hear your questions. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts that they would like to share, I'm sure Emmanuel would be as much appreciative of just your question. He just wants to know what your questions would be. Am I wrong?
Or comment or
comment or observation or.
Do you think that you could have found this way through, or I guess these like hard realizations through of God's solidarity, if you wouldn't have had to experience your experiences that you had?
I mean, the growing up and the experience that I've.
Yeah, and just like seeing like the destruction of the forests and like communities dying. Do you think you would have been able to have those realizations?
No. What was your name?
Brett.
Right. No, I don't think so. Well, I have nothing against thought and thinking clear about things. Hey, I'm a philosopher. Full disclosure here. But I don't think we can think ourselves into. Yeah, as one scholar once wrote about the work in the civil rights movement, that I have had, there are so few people who have read Nietzsche and went and established soup kitchens. We're not picking on philosophers, okay? Yeah, but there is something about experience. There's something about being touched. Something about being in a way drawn into a reality, physically, concretely. And that speaks so much about education as well. Classroom education is wonderful and so forth, but there is also the experiential education that a number of people, in a way, find, discover a core through that is connected with what they are learning and so forth. But experience, I think, is the best, in a way, trigger, if you like, of a general learning. But this is not only just to say, that you need to go and live among the poor, then that you discover that. These experiences are everywhere. Here in Helena. So perhaps that's why Pope Francis is calling for an attentiveness. Education, he says, is about the cultivation of listening. Education teaches listening. If it doesn't teach listening, it's not education. And one might say, well, isn't education about knowledge? Well, that's different from real education. Education is about listening, learning, seeing. And so how do we, in a way, cultivate and open ourselves to see? I think God has planted all the experiences that we need everywhere. So, but these are the kind of experiences that really are important. So that's why the openness that Pope Francis is talking about when he was, for example, giving a TED talk to the young people about the revolution of tenderness. It's a TED talk that he gave to young people. If you have not watched that, Google it up, revolution of tenderness. It's very touching when it's training young people. You are the future. But it's inviting them in a way, that kind of attentiveness, listening. And the problem with the child that we have, the culture that we live in, is almost kind of prevents it. It kind of encourages us not to attend, not to listen, to kind of be busy with our tech and things like that and so on. So, but it's just kind of this kind of experience, really listening, opening ourselves to reality, I think is the greatest challenge that we have in our time, and also the greatest opportunity. And hope all education can encourage us to just be attentive, just to listen, just to see, what is going on all around us, so that it's not just all focused on me and myself and what kind of skills or degree that I need to get this job, to get this kind of paycheck, or even as that is important too. Thanks, Moran. I hope that it answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for such a very touching and involving lecture or story about your journey. When you started, you said that this journey that you started 10 years ago or so kind of got you to think differently, and you come back to that at the end. And I was thinking of a poem by a poet, you probably know him, Derek Walcott. And one line in his poem is, if you want to change your language, you have to change your life. And if you were to replace language with thinking, which I think is connected to language, if you want to change your way of thinking, you have to change your life. And in a sense, that is what you showed through your story here tonight. So going back to, your conclusion about think little, which I think would be a great motto for philosophy departments all over. Could you elaborate a little more about how this experience has got you to think differently and think in other ways? In some way you have spoken a little bit about that now, how it has to be engaged and experienced, and Bethany shows how that happens. There is an interconnectedness between mind, soul, spirit. So could you say something more about how your thinking, having engaged with this kind of novelty, new thing, has affected your way of doing philosophy or thinking, how you teach your classes differently? And connected to that, whether that has got you to think about how our academic institutions perhaps need some remodeling, I guess, given your experience with this new Bethany institution, which you say it's an important part of carrying over to the future. So maybe I hope it's clear enough.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I love that poem. I don't know the poem, but if you want to change
your language, you have to change your life.
You have to change your life. I think that's true. That's exactly true. Perhaps the only thing that I might change there is that we don't change our lives. I mean, it's difficult to even change our life. We get changed many times in spite of us. And I think that also connects to Brad's question about experience. I think the attentiveness, the openness to be aware of what is going on and step into it, thinking that it's going to be a short-term thing, and then I go back to my way of doing things. But then before you know it, you get deeper and deeper and deeper into it. When I started with the Bethany Land Institute, that's what I thought. Okay, we're going to do this project in the little community. 3 acres, maybe I'll do 25 acres of forests. Then I'll plant that forest and take care of it, and bring people to. So for me, it was that's what I can do over the summer when I get a chance to do. But it got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Now I'm waking up thinking about nothing but BLI. I used to think that actually I'm leading BLI. for God's sake, I'm the president of BLI, so I should be leading BLI. But honestly, when I wake up, I think, it is leading me. you see. So there is a sense in which the I, who changes my life and so forth, is also misleading. But our lives get changed in a way. My life has taken a different turn, been changed by this kind of small steps that I took. I don't know what hooked me. Maybe actually kind of when we get hooked, and before you know it, the life has changed. But when that happens in a way, you discover that you have changed actually, and that your own sensibilities and ways that the things that you care about also begin to change. One of the most difficult part that I have is finding myself in an academic institution that kind of does things very differently, that is very clear about thinking clearly, and find myself at a research university where I will need to publish books that are heavily, in a way, footnoted what counts for scholarship, especially if you have to earn tenure and things like that. And I find myself, well, I'm not caring as much about that as I used to. And in fact, I begin to see they are a kind of a trap, this kind of, in a way, academic expectation, in a way, that kind of almost does not allow us to step outside of that kind of encounter a reality. What has happened for me and what's continuing to happen is to kind of find myself in this kind of odd space as a scholar practitioner, trying to do both the scholarship and this concrete engagement. But if push will come to shove and say, the academic can always go on, but there is something urgent about work like this. And you constantly feel more and more, well, perhaps this is a kind of calling that if I don't do this, I will not live true to who I am, who I'm called to be. So again, it's not kind of thinking, it's kind of really rediscovering a vocation, a calling, and that kind of messes your life up. Especially if you're in the academy with different particular expectations and so forth. What I'm trying to do is to kind of bring out these lessons in terms of my teaching, in terms of what I research on or what I write on, trying to, in a way, but still, you could feel that it's a little bit odd within that kind of space. I guess if we're thinking about solidarity, not just from an academic point of view, we're going to find ourselves as odd scholars and odd teachers. You cannot go on in the same way, in a way. For some people, it will be frustrating because I'm sure the administrators among us will be extremely frustrated because they expect certain kind of results and so on. But at the same time, there's something urgent about this. This is life. These are millions and millions of people who depend on this. Of course, even the academy, their lives that are at stake. But from a theological point of view, the margins are critical. It is through the margins that we are saved. It's not that we serve the margins. The poor, the sick, the marginalized are the way to God's heart. So how do we connect with that and still do the kind of scholarship? For me, what I've discovered is that my scholarship has gotten more vocation, more mission, more purpose. It is to communicate some of these insights that I'm learning from the margins about what the academy ought to do. So I find myself very frustrated, unhappy, or uneasy with the kind of the purely academic speculation that I used to enjoy. Yeah, so this has happened. And I like that it has changed because I feel I have found something quite important on which to kind of stake my vocation. At the same time, I am a teacher, I'm a professor, but a particular type of professor who is always constantly drawing attention to why places like the Bethlehem of this world matter for the life of the world. So I know I'm just kind of talking. So hopefully some of those things you can always figure out. You have always been very good at figuring me out. even when others have very always say that I spoke with an accent, you always figured out my accent. So,
We do.
thank you.
And I have one too. Thank you.
So in talking about the economic disparity in the world, we thank you for bringing up language because I've been wrestling with us. We talk about the developed world and the developing world as though the world is becoming one thing. We don't talk about the harmonious world, I guess. So when I speak to people about this, there's this really common opinion that, an economic free trade zone and industrial development is a good thing. It benefits the people there because it helps them develop. It helps them become this thing that is better than what they were in some way. And so it seems like what you're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, with BLI is working counter to that development, right? So what would you say to the person that says, from the developed world, you are keeping these people from becoming what they can become? And conversely, what would you say to the person in the developing world who says, but I want to develop, I want to go, I see these things and that's what I want. Why would you keep me from succeeding? Why would you keep me from getting this thing that I want? So I'm curious how you would respond to those sorts of questions.
Well, thank you very much. What's your name again?
Ryan.
Ryan, thank you very much. This is a profound question of development. And I think there are two angles that I can go about it. First of all, to confirm exactly what you said. We're working with these caretakers, young people from the rural communities. We have just hired a new director who has a master's in integral ecology and sustainable agriculture. And said from now on, what we're going to do is regenerative agriculture and to care for the land in a natural way, because the pesticide and the chemical fertilizers are doing actually more harm, not only to the land, but also to our health. So we're going to be very, very intentional doing regenerative agriculture. And I can promise that we shall actually do it and be able to be well. The caretakers themselves almost revolted and said, no, there is no way. How can we do that? First of all, everybody is using chemical fertilizers and pesticide, overly using chemicals and pesticide. We are not even going to be able to compete on the market. Our tomatoes are going to be this little, but the market is wanting these huge, shiny tomatoes. There's no way that we can compete with them. And he showed them, well, we may not be able to compete in the kind of like with the genetically modified tomatoes, these huge tomatoes that are bigger than a pumpkin. But we will do tomatoes, and what we might not gain in terms of size and shine, we recover in terms of nutrition content and the kind of natural and earth. So they started. 6 months into the program, I visit, and the caretakers themselves are the most excited about this regenerative agriculture. The very young people that were saying, no, there is no way. And I said, what happened? They said, well, two things. One, Lazarus, I've been studying reading Lazarus. Two, Mr.
Sylvester Cooley, the director, has exposed us to the scientific knowledge that actually we didn't know about all these chemical and pesticide and things like that, how dangerous they are, not only to the soil, but also to the future. And so these young people were the most excited about that, and they are willing to kind of share that knowledge with others. The mainstream, the conventional agricultural people, some of them have visited and say, what are you trying to do? It's really taking the Kroc backwards. We need to move on with modern progress, industrial agriculture, become like America. We do farming American way. We are only here, but that's what we are aspiring to. You seem to be kind of holding us back. But you say, well, this is what cares for Mother Earth. If we have to care for Mother Earth, we cannot go on the same way. But also more and more, and this is the second way to comment on that, more and more, this language of development has become misleading and it's not sustainable. There's no way that we can go on developing toward what? There's no way that the whole of the world would live like America. There is no way that even the American lifestyle is sustainable. The American lifestyle can be sustained only if, one, the rest of the world population stays where they are. Maybe that's the whole point of that. Two, by using all the natural resources, by completely continuing to deplete the earth. This is a lie of this endless progress that we can go on developing. Keough is one economist from the London School of Economics that have questioned the whole economic logic of development. And in its stead, she's suggesting what she describes as donut economics. Because she questioned this plane that takes off and develops, when does this plane ever land, or does it ever land? Last night, I was at a panel discussion on a movie, Once You Know, by a French filmmaker, Emmanuel, I forget the last name. And some discussion came up about language of development, even sustainable development. This is all kind of really modifying the development. We don't seem to be willing to give up on this idea of development or progress. But all the science facts, the environmental effects footprint of this development, there's no way that it can be sustained. It is time that we think this economic model in terms of flourishing. Why don't we use the term flourishing? It's flourishing not only for human beings, but flourishing internally, spiritually. By the way, the spiritual dimension is very important, spiritual flourishing, but also flourishing in society and community, not this kind of individualistic development and so forth. And thirdly, the flourishing of the earth. If any of these relationship is broken, we may develop all you want, we may have GDPs, we may go to the moon, we may have a lot of toys and things like that. But there is no way that that can be sustained. I think education really needs to get into this question. Should we be developing? Developing to what? There is no way that we can pretend that at least that's what I got from the discussion last night from this movie. There is no way that we can pretend, or that we can go on. That this climate change, this is just kind of cyclical. It always goes on like that and so on. It is real, and so it is inconvenient, but we have to face it. Either we have to face it, or we will collapse under the weight of development. I hope it's not too late. Thank you. Sure.
I think we could probably go on and on. But I think maybe we'll close up for now. It's getting late in the evening. We very much appreciate your being with us. You're sharing some of your journey with us. It's been, I think, very good for us, given us a lot to think about. I was thinking as you were talking, I was hearing the questions of how many Bethanies do we miss that we overlook? That kind of attentiveness, that listening. I'm sure there's a Bethany in Helena somewhere, probably a couple of them, right? And the real challenge is that our thinking doesn't remain abstracted. It was brought up, but I was thinking, well, you know, I too kind of teach and I'm an academic, et cetera, but can you really be an academic and not have dirty hands? Are the dirty hands not important as we think? Hands disconnected from the earth, from the dirt, risk being like that development that never lands that you spoke of. We thank you very, very much for being here with us. We wish you well as you go forward in your journeys and your Bethany project. And can everybody give them a round of applause?
Please visit Bethlehem Land Institute website, or there, like us, to sign up for updates. And if there's any way that you can support that work, please support us. Thank you.
Can you put the website?
Yes. I could also put it on our Moodle page. Maybe remind me that I'll put it on our Moodle class Moodle. So thank you all very much. Thank you to Brad for helping us up on tech stuff today. We'd have been in trouble without him, so we thank him very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
I'm assuming there were no questions.